What 8 right-leaning columnists think about Republican candidates for 2024. I confess I didn't invite George F. Will, because I figured he writes exclusively in taut 750-word increments. But I gathered the rest of the right-leaning, though not, in the minds of a vocal subset of our readers, right-thinking, columnists at Post Opinions for a conversation over email about the state of the 2024 Republican presidential primary. Ron DeSantis is finally in. So is Tim Scott. Nikki Haley, Asa Hutchinson, Vivek Ramaswamy and Donald Trump were already there. Here comes Chris Christie next week, and soon enough he'll be joined by Mike Pence and, we assume, Chris Sununu. So, I asked, we have, at last, a field. Are you happy with it? I'll let them take it from here. Jim Garrity, in a normal political environment, Republicans would be thrilled with the emerging 2024 presidential field. But this is not a normal political environment, is it? So far, and yes, it is early, most Republicans don't appear to be the slightest bit interested in any candidate not named Donald Trump or Ron DeSantis. Henry Olsen, it looks like a two-person race for one simple reason: only DeSantis and Trump have credibility with the MAGA majority of the primary electorate. Unless that changes, any seeming surge by someone else, hello, Tim Scott, will simply be a sign that person is consolidating the non-MAGA minority. Jason Willick, if Trump had lost in 2020 like a normal president, leaving office uneventfully without inspiring a riot, there probably wouldn't even be a 2024 primary of consequence. Republican voters loved Trump's performance in office by huge margins. In retrospect, if January 6 hadn't happened, Trump's pitch, "Who's ready for round 2?" would face little resistance. Hugh Hewitt, any pundit should be cautious when assessing the GOP field. Will the future nominee even be on the debate stage in Milwaukee in August when the Republican National Committee kicks off the first in a schedule of candidate gatherings? We don't know for sure yet whether former President Trump will deign to join the group that assembles that night. We also don't know when the Iowa caucuses will gather or when New Hampshire voters will vote. Ramesh Ponnuru, I suspect that Jason is wrong about what would have happened if Trump acknowledged his defeat in 2020. Modern parties are pretty unforgiving toward losers, which helps explain why Mitt Romney couldn't even find a way into a crowded field in 2015 and John Kerry's occasional post-2004 presidential musings have been taken seriously by almost no one. If Trump had acted like a normal defeated candidate, the party's conversation would have turned to why he lost, and the answers would have mostly had to do with his personal defects rather than bad luck or structural forces. If he wins in 2024, it will be because of his election lies and not despite of them. Mark Thiessen, the GOP primary electorate breaks down into 3 big blocks: 1. Hard MAGA, about 1/4 of the vote, who will only back Trump in the primary; 2. Soft MAGA, about 1/2 the vote, who are deciding between Trump and other candidates; and 3. Not MAGA, another 1/4 of the vote, who won't consider voting for Trump at all. The question for those challenging Trump is, how much of the soft MAGA vote is separable from Trump, and how best to separate them from him? Gary Abernathy, I'm not sure enough Republicans hold Trump accountable for losing. They just think he needs more help against the deep state. Mark Thiessen, Trump campaigned in 2016 by saying that Americans were tired of losing and that if we elected him, we'd win so much we'd be sick of winning. Well, most Republicans are sick of losing. I think hard MAGA believes Trump won twice, but soft MAGA is not so sure. Hugh Hewitt, about 30 million votes were cast in GOP primaries and caucuses in 2016, so I think it's just flat out impossible to predict what message will resonate with the folks turning out in 2024. I do think Biden's age, it's scary, will drive a lot of voters to the polls, and the idea that age matters is going to favor the young candidates. I continue to put almost no stock in polling until after 2 or more debates. They changed everything in the fall of 2015 and will do so again this year. If a candidate is on the stage, they are in the hunt. Gary Abernathy, the Trump supporters I know, and who claim to be considering other candidates, I doubt they really are, say they want someone from outside the establishment, someone who will take on the system. That, conveniently, virtually disqualifies the rest of the field so far. Vivek Ramaswamy appeals to most Republicans, but he's cursed by the catch-22 that everyone likes him but no one thinks he can win. Meghan McArdle, I am tempted to make the case for Ramaswamy, an urge that is mostly explained by the fact that I just wrote a column on Ramaswamy. Everyone in this race wants to run a modified Trump playbook, new and improved. With 33% less vulgarity, and 25% more of whatever it was you liked about him. Only no one actually understands which parts of the Trump playbook worked. So DeSantis is trying to run the culture war part, only with more administrative competence. Scott is running it too, only with upbeat Reaganite insouciance instead of the gloomy gutter Damroom vibe. And Ramaswamy is closest to having the full package, because in addition to the anti-woke stuff, and a soupçon of, gee, isn't America great? Optimism, he's running the media piece. He's accepting hits promiscuously and making good television. Henry Olsen, Tim Scott is an appealing figure, a fresh face, and someone who's running as an updated version of the 1984-era Ronald Reagan. That could have a lot of appeal to the non-MAGA minority, which in turn could fuel a fast summer rise. Trump showed that the summer can be decisive in primaries. He started the summer of 2015 upside down in favorability with Republicans and ended Labor Day right side up. If DeSantis, Scott or someone else can replicate that feat, the race will look very different on Labor Day than it does today. Gary Abernathy, the wild card might be Scott. A lot of Trump voters I know consider Scott their second choice. He'll be given every chance to make his case. Jason Willick, if the 2016 Republican primary is your reference point, Ron DeSantis is a hybrid of Marco Rubio, Chris Christie, and Ted Cruz. Like Rubio, he's a young Floridian who clearly is influenced by the latest conservative intellectual ideas. Like Christie, he is a combative executive, not a legislator. Like Cruz, he's more or less an ideological purist or at least has increasingly become one. Gary Abernathy, what we learned in 2016 with Rubio, Cruz, Jeb Bush, etc., is that you cannot win an insult contest with Donald Trump. He's too good at it. Going forward, whether in interviews or, eventually, on a debate stage, DeSantis should kill Trump with kindness and express confusion about Trump's attacks, which is frankly what most Trump supporters feel about them. Even people who prefer Trump over DeSantis find Trump's attacks on him baffling. DeSantis should acknowledge, yes, I'm following in Trump's footsteps. He blazed the trail. He showed us the way. Unfortunately, he was unable to finish the job. We gave him a chance and he blew it. But where he failed, he'll succeed, and I already have a track record of success. Meghan McArdle, I think launching on Twitter Spaces was probably a mistake for DeSantis, but also that it won't matter. It is a sign of a campaign that is too online, but by the same token, the only people who really care are also too online, and not much like a normal primary voter. Mark Thiessen, right now, DeSantis appears to be the candidate best positioned to be sufficiently MAGA for soft MAGA while also acceptable to the not MAGA voters. It's far from certain that any one candidate will be able to forge a coalition of enough votes from both groups to beat Trump. But it's possible. It will require discipline on the part of those who fail to forge that coalition to recognize it and step aside. Whether that kind of selflessness will be on display during the 2024 campaign is uncertain, to say the least. Ramesh Ponnuru, I am skeptical that DeSantis will make much headway using an electability argument against Trump. A lot of Republican voters think Trump has already won 2 presidential elections. I think Gary's idea of Trump being past his prime has some promise, though. So, too, the argument that DeSantis has been more effective at delivering conservative victories than Trump has. DeSantis has also suggested that he might take aim at Trump's sense of entitlement. With Trump sending out fundraising emails urging Republicans to wrap up the primary, on the supposed grounds that having a contest will help only George Soros, it's a justified criticism. Jason Willick, I think the GOP field says something good about the party. Between DeSantis, Haley, Christie, Sununu, Pence and even Youngkin, it could showcase competent Republican executive leadership in a range of states. Tim Scott is a good senator, but it's probably for the best that he's the only one in the race. The upper chamber has become too much of a forum for presidential auditions. We don't really have a field, however, so much as a Trump against all throwdown. If the electorate were limited to voters with college degrees, it would probably select someone other than Trump. Non-college voters, who are more numerous, are simply less exercised by Trump's flaws than most Republicans in Washington are. Mark Thiessen, the polls show that the vast majority of Americans do not want a Trump-Biden rematch. If you take them both out of the picture and put our bench up against the Democrats, the future is very bright. We have an embarrassment of riches. Unfortunately, our system seems poised to give the American people exactly what they don't want. Jim Garrity, Kentucky GOP Congressman Thomas Massie made this observation about how the Tea Party and Ron Paul fans could abandon their libertarian views and suddenly embrace Donald Trump, but after some soul-searching I realized when they voted for Rand and Ron and me in these primaries, they weren't voting for libertarian ideas, they were voting for the craziest son of a bitch in the race. And Donald Trump won best in class, as we had up until he came along. For a long stretch now, a growing percentage of voters in the Republican presidential primary, and in some cases, gubernatorial and senatorial and House primaries, have wanted the craziest person in the race. This observation is not going to make me popular, but pick the craziest one is a dumb way of picking nominees and presidents. You would not want the craziest person to be your child's pediatrician. You would not want the craziest person to be admiral of a naval fleet. You would not want the craziest person to be your boss. And you would not want the craziest person to be your child's teacher, although maybe you've watched the feed of libs of TikTok and discovered that your child's teacher is, in fact, crazy. By normal measurements, Republicans have a terrific selection of options this cycle. Alas, there's still a strong appetite for the craziest candidate in the race, and I think we all know which dining companion of ye, formerly known as Kanye West and Nick Fuentes, wins on that criteria. What 8 right-leaning columnists think about Republican candidates for 2024. I confess I didn't invite George F. Will, because I figured he writes exclusively in taut 750-word increments. But I gathered the rest of the right-leaning, though not, in the minds of a vocal subset of our readers, right-thinking, columnists at Post Opinions for a conversation over email about the state of the 2024 Republican